So then, yeah, I want to invite the speakers who are still here for the panel discussion. So have a seat. So Peter, you're also invited. Maybe directly a couple of questions for you, Peter, in function of your presentation. Do you have any idea why in certain member states, or in certain countries you were active, you had much more participants than in other ones?
Yes. Yes, that has to do with the way how it was organized. Yeah. For example, in Czech Republic, they did the national trainings like a kind of a roadshow. So they visited several towns and had training on a very local, regional level. And therefore, we see so much more participants in Czech Republic than, for example, in the Netherlands, where our partner TVVL normal organizes courses for 20 to 30 persons.
Okay. Is that a way forward that if you really want to scale up, because I'm trying to bridge again to what we have to achieve, that a kind of a best practice that you're going to organize these kind of road shows and trying to scale up, because that's really one of the big challenges, of course, how to scale up.
Yes, if you want to come to a real large impact, that could be indeed a very good idea to use. It was not initially planned, but our Czech partners came with this idea to see if it works, and we saw that immediately you had much more participants. But from the other hand, if I look to the other training providers, and they're all RIVA or Arch the Council of Europe members, they do it in the regular courses, and the regular courses will be repeated every year. So we started with one pilot in the framework of ProfTech, and then looked if it was a lasting action, so if it also could continue in the next years, and we saw that it can continue in all the countries that we have.
Okay. Thank you. Are there some specific questions regarding the presentations of Horia and Peter from the room? No? Okay, but then we can go over to the last session, so the panel discussion. So we have prepared some questions. And yeah, I think some of you have already answered the first question, but not Horia or Peter, I guess. That's the 3 million. So how scaling up, how going to achieve that? Are you thinking at some solutions?
3 million, it's a huge number. I'm thinking from Romania. I think that we have to make a distinction between qualification and skill upgrading. In Romania, what we did in the status quo analysis and we projected in the roadmap, it was about qualification. I've already mentioned qualification. It means long-term programs. It's very difficult to have this, and it takes also a modification of attitude, because training or qualifying is investing in yourself, and I don't think that most of the workers have this attitude of investing in their own person. On the other hand, we need a bit of regulation, a bit of mandatory. Either mandatory trainings, for example, for safety, which is usually done, or requirements in the tendering process for the construction works. Not only mandatory, because we do not have a sufficient pool of workers, of qualified workers, but just to pull something, just to give a score, a better score, to the company which invested in the qualification of their own personnel. So
what they are doing in the Baltics, in some Baltic countries, that all tendering you have to be mandatory or certified skilled people, otherwise they don't go with you.
Yeah. So we are speaking about an increase, I would say a significant increase in the training demand. although apparently it was a very good thing that we had the structural funds for human resources until I would say 2 years ago. Much training was paid by these European funds. Apparently it was a good thing, but the construction sector was not yet very present there. On the other hand, by providing training for free or even paying people to come to training, I think this is a vicious action to do. So we now need to think of natural, healthy boosters. So I'm coming back. We need a bit of regulation, a bit of mandatory, a bit or more than a bit control in order to build the attitude towards self-control, about the attitude towards qualification.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you want to add something?
I think it's clear that 3 million people, it's a very large number. At the same time, I think that it's not impossible if you have a pragmatic approach, and if you think, like you were saying, if you use the right drivers, and it can be different. I will refer again to the examples I gave in the case of, for example, cavity wall installation. There was a consensus with the stakeholders, so the contract, if I look to my own situation, number of cases, like for example, internal installation, where there was a consensus among the contractors, yes, our contractors should understand the risks and the way to go forward, and hundreds of people followed the training. So I think it can work, but it's challenging. But I think that often you hear the contractor sector is, or the building sector is not delivering quality. I'm convinced the sector can deliver quality if you create the good boundary conditions. Take, for example, electricity, where I think everybody understands there is a health risk, a safety risk. I think people think in advance, how should I come to good work? So they plan it, they take care. At the end, there is a kind of control. And I think each electrician has followed a certain training. We speak of hundreds of thousands of electricians. But there, I think there is the driver security, but also the rules to work it. So I'm quite sure it can be done, but it's, you should find the drivers to motivate the market. And of course, you should give the market the time. It's not a question of 1 year. 1 year, you need a few years to get there.
And what Horia said about the public market, if we are going to work with public procurement rules, which are more severe in that respect, will it help?
I think it can help, yes. If there is clearly a specification that you... So I think you can have different drivers. It can be that you focus on the delivered quality of the works, and if people know I need to invest in training to deliver the quality, or you can say I want the work to be done by people who have shown competence. So I think there are different mechanisms, and what I believe is very important is to come with formulas which are supported by the stakeholders. For example, we saw in Belgium when at a certain moment of time the contractors thought that the idea was to require certified installers of ventilation systems. And they were clearly against, and so then it was clear, no, we focus on the end result. So which means that even if you do it yourself, you can install your ventilation system, but of course, if you are not trained, the chance that you will get the airflow rates, the acoustics, okay, is very small. And there was support of the contractor saying, yes, focus on the end result, and then depending on the situation, contractors and designers will invest in training or not. So I think it's finding the right cocktail of stimulus to invest in training. And I think that most contractors, most architects are willing if they see the added value.
Peter, do you want to? Yeah.
What I think could be important is that we embed it somehow in procurement, but also, for example, in obtaining building permits. For example, if you are asking for a building permit and you can prove that you have a certain quality, which is linked to training, of course, and competences, then perhaps you need less control, or you could have some incentives that you have cheaper building permits. These kind of simple mechanisms.
We have to come with some mechanisms which are not too difficult, because otherwise it will take another 20 years before we are that far. One of maybe the possibilities, and also to bridge directly to one of the discussions that was raised earlier, not today, but during some discussions, is between initial vet and continuous vet. If we are going to focus more on initial vet, is that also maybe one of the possibilities that at least the new inflow into the construction sector, that these people will be at least have a certain minimum level of skills.
Yeah, I mentioned something earlier in my presentation. We need, of course, going to initial education, the initial vet, it's very important because it creates something like a good qualification, because it's a long-term program, but you have to be careful when they finished, when the people finish the initial education, they have to be ready for the market. And their programs should be market-driven. So in this case, a partnership between the industry and initial professional education, it's crucial. And we have an example from Germany, and also it's a system that will be installed in Romania. It's already running. It is called the dual education. It's about partnership between the school and the industry. It is working well in the productive sector, but unfortunately in the construction sector is not working yet. You have to have commitment. When the industry needs qualified people, they will commit. So they will commit to help the school, but also to have at least 2 or 3 years the people already qualified in their company. Until now, despite the bureaucracy, which is really the case in Romania in most of the sectors, we have to have the attitude from the construction companies to be involved in this. So this is under discussion.
How is it in the Netherlands or in Belgium? Because in some other sectors there are pretty good relationships between the education system and the professional sector, where people can really start, where they really need to follow a certain level, otherwise they can't start. Is this something that has to be further followed up and increased?
If I look to the situation in the Netherlands, there are indeed several possibilities to have good training on several levels, both on a workers level, both on a professional level. But it is, it should be continuously being followed up, and and especially now when technologies are changing very, very fast. I think the need is very big to come to this upskilling and to use these programs. But the programs are there. That's not the problem.
What's the problem then?
I think that not all stakeholders know that. Not all stakeholders know that they are there, and also it's always a matter of time. Perhaps also money, but especially time, I think, in the building sector.
These are students. These are people who are being prepared for the market. They should have time.
Yes, I was more referring to professionals already working in the field. In the normal education, I think what could be improved is, for example, relationships between educational sector and building sector, like traineeships, but also, for example, the Erasmus program. There are some programs that foster the collaboration between students and companies, yeah. Okay. And this is very useful.
Peter, do you want to add something? Oh.
So in Belgium, the constructor sector has, let's say, a fund managed by the contracting companies and the representative of the employees about permanent education. So it's quite substantial fund, so where they identify what are the training needs, how to set it up. So I think in the sector, and it's wider than energy, yeah, there is, I think, a clear structure to invest in permanent training. Of course, what I think is challenging with the quickly evolving techniques on energy efficiency, renewables, the upgrading of these courses have to be done, let's say, also quite quickly. With respect to education, let's say, of students, there I think the challenge, and I think there are some quite good initiatives, is to be sure that what's taught in the schools is in line with the recent technological developments. But it's in both cases, I think it's challenging, but you cannot say that the sector is not paying attention to trying to keep the level up to date. Of course, what will happen in practice is then to do what are the boundary conditions to apply what you have learned. Because if there is no driver to really deliver quality, then of course so sometimes it's this missing chain, how to guarantee that the knowledge you have, you really apply, because typically delivering good quality takes some more effort, a little bit more cost. Yeah. So I think it's the whole chain you have to analyze, but training is important.
Perhaps one thing that I would like to share, because I'm also teaching in Belgium at a university to first years and second year masters, architecture. But during my courses, I teach them a little bit about building services and building physics. And of course, they hate it as architectural students. But this is the first time that they learn a little bit about building services, about installations as an architectural student. And they really liked it. For example, if you tell them what the power of architecture is to avoid unnecessary installations, then they're really going to like it. But it's in a very late stage in the education. And I think we see that in other universities as well.
Is that
so
also one of the
about
reasons?
integration,
Yeah,
about multidisciplinary.
Indeed. That's just what I wanted to ask. Is there, I don't know, Horia, you're also teaching, or you were teaching. Is it one of the things we have to think about, that there should be much more a link between people dealing with education programs and the construction sector as such, that there is kind of a forum where people can really discuss together and setting up these kind of programs together?
Yes, I think it's a very good idea. I do not know how to be put in practice in Romania because of the educational system and because of the, I would say, already traditional autonomy of universities. I don't know. It's a good idea, but also the construction sector, the construction company should bend over towards the education system. And the problem is the same with the university and with the initial VET system. They really have to change something in the attitude of the construction companies. Some of them are seeing these things and are interested to collaborate with schools, also with universities. But on the other hand, it's the educational system who should be more flexible on this. And it's about a preparation activity from the 6th, 7th grade, for example, in order to do a good marketing for the construction sector, in order to attract people for the profession. Not all the children have to be, I don't know, engineers or PhDs or...
Okay. And linked to what you were saying, and it's going to the next question, is that some people say in VET programs, in general, there is not enough distinction between focusing on NZTBs and new dwellings and renovation, and there should be a clear distinction between the approaches.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that it should be a really clear distinction. Of course, renovation has its specificities, but if you think about NZEB, you're thinking about performance. And there are, I think there is more common core than differences between new and renovation. And for example, in Romania, it's very difficult to speak about the core of NZEB, speaking about mechanical ventilation, where the usual practice is natural ventilation, which it's very difficult to control. You cannot speak about airtightness when you have no requirements on airtightness. It's very difficult to speak about very performant envelope when the requirements are not so high. So I think that the difference between renovation and new buildings comes after you have detailed enough the performance for NZEP.
Peter, do you want to add something on this one?
No.
No?
Just no.
You do agree
Yeah.
with, and Peter, do you also agree?
Not completely, because what I noticed in the Netherlands, there's now a trend in building or renovation, what we call 0 on the meter, so practically energy zero. And that definitely you have other technologies in renovation than for new building. And it also requires some extra skills, not only on technologies, but also in a social way, how to deal with end users, how to deal with occupants, how to understand occupant needs.
Yeah.
And this also differs, again, from profession to profession. For example, managers of housing companies, they definitely have a need for extra training how to deal with their occupants in case of an energy zero renovation, because that can be quite dramatic. And also engineers, for example, they need to understand that there are other technologies available specifically developed for existing buildings, existing housing, than for new buildings. There's absolutely a difference.
Good. Okay. So then I'm going to the last question. It's a dual question for all of you. So we discussed already lots of issues about tools, about barriers, also about how can we stimulate the demand for skills much more. But as an open question, I really like to know from you. Imagine that you are policymakers in your own countries, and you have the possibility now to decide what should be done to deal with the issues we have been talking about today in the short and medium term. What would you do? So short, let's say the first 2 years, medium between 2 and 5.
Don't be shy.
I have 2 micros.
First of all, I've never wanted to be in my life a policy maker. So for me it's very difficult to answer this question. Nevertheless, I think that we should focus on a good balance between what can be regulated in the market and what should be done on a policy level. The example that I mentioned with assume that you are able to prove the quality of your building by a good quality system, but especially also in good training, then for me it's not so important that you have an extended building permit or something like that, or calculations, because it's in your quality system. And in that case, for example, you could have some benefits as a constructor or a real estate developer of it. I think thinking about these kind of new measures could really help enhancing the quality. But I don't know if it's a short time or mid-term. I think that it is more on a mid-term level. But we really need to come to a new generation of performance certificates.
Boria?
Well, if you want me to be short, I will say carrot, stick, and shout it out loud. Of course, in my opinion, I will have a bigger carrot than a stick, but you need the stick.
What kind of carrots do you think about then?
Money. So special fund for high quality training. Access to public money only with some requirements on qualification, on competence, on capability of the company, of the construction company. I'm not surprised, but I'm disappointed also, because we do not have the construction company representatives in Romania in this, although we have a big network and we transmitted invitations for several times, and also we do not have the EPBD implementer here. Hopefully it will be tomorrow. which is the Ministry of Regional Development. I mentioned that because they are the regulators and they are the markets. So access to money, special funds for training, and awareness. We did not have, and we desperately needed, programs on shouting out and showing the benefits of highly insulated buildings, of mechanical ventilation, of controlled performances, nearly zero energy buildings, what really its meaning, and on renovation. If you shout out the benefits and you proved that you financed from public money excellence, for example, public buildings at nearly zero energy level, and not to show that you spent some money, but to show the performances in a very well developed awareness program, I think that you will move the mountains.
And the stick?
And the stick is the regulation, is the control, is the compliance that we need.
That's really needed, if I understand you well.
In order to check the quality.
I think that for policymakers, what I think is really important is the intention to play a role in the whole quality framework. And I think it's very broad, so it can be from, let's say, interest in identifying educational needs, because policymakers have there a big potential. But it can also be already, for example, if they do some kind of research funding, are they willing to devote part of the money on that? I know that the country did a study, for example, on what is in practice the experiences with solar domestic hot water systems, as just to see what's the performances, which highlighted a lot of, let's say, non-compliance issues, also security issues. And that can be a trigger for the market to become aware and to become motivated, yes, we should work on it. So I think it's about education, about making the scene more clear, also perhaps helping on identifying more efficient ways to come to quality. And then I think there is the whole area where policy or government can help in or can play a role in incentives, take for example subsidies, which can be coupled on quality requirements or even just imposing requirements. But there I think it's really essential that this is not done as politics on its own, but in collaboration with the stakeholders, because imposing requirements is one thing, but if you have not a compliance framework behind it, it can stay an empty box. And as politicians, really to have an effective compliance framework not supported by stakeholders is extremely challenging. So I think that it's really this, I would say, is there the will at political level to work on quality in these different ways? And also I think, is there a willingness to really work together with the market to find those ways which the market really wants? Because if stakeholders, whether architects, contractors, investors, are clearly against sanctioning, it's extremely difficult for politics in this area where there is no life-threatening risk. It's more vague to really impose strong
But we have the quality demand from the directives and from the market.
Yes, but still, I think it's very essential that politicians feel the support of the market, that there should be requirements, including sanctions. So I think it's not only that you can say the politicians have to solve it. No, it should be the politicians who have the motivation, but together with the market, create the boundary conditions. It's the same with speed control. As a politician, you may say you may not drive quicker than that, but if the market is overall strongly against it, that there are sanctions, it's politically very difficult. But once you have the support of the market, it works. Take, for example, France. Till 10 years ago, when I came from Belgium, 120 kilometers per hour. In France, it was 130, but you drive 160, there was no problem. Today, if you are in France and you drive 135, you are the quickest on the highway, because the French one has this point system, and they are really extremely careful.
But that's a nice example of a top-down approach.
But supported by the market.
Half.
I think quite well supported.
But I think it's a nice example that sometimes you need a minimum of regulation in place, top-down, to really push forward the market. Otherwise, it should all come bottom-up, and then it takes really long time. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I will add that first of all, you have to have a healthy regulation. We are speaking about energy performance. You have to have a good methodology, a clear one, not ambiguous. Maybe a calculation system or calculation software like in Ireland or in other countries where the only way that you can make mistake, it's on the input data, not on calculations. And then, if we are speaking about energy performance, you have to trust the energy performance certificate or the system, the certification system. And as we can see, as we proved in the QualiCheck project, within the study that we have on real buildings, checking the quality of energy performance certificates, in half of cases, because of the input data and because of the not uniform and not validated calculation software, there was at least a change in one class.
Okay, thank you. Thank you speakers to be here today with us. Thank you for being here